All right, I ran out of time as I was trying to talk about so-called grazing fees on federal grazing allotments. So I want to come back and shoot another short clip attempting to dispel popular misconceptions about so-called grazing fees. I've shot a series of short clips today talking about popular misconceptions about everything from seeking redress of grievances and adverse possession and prior appropriation and beneficial use. And so now I want to talk about so-called grazing fees. Those are the administrative fees that are paid by federal grazing allotment owners to the federal government for the government's assistance in the management of those allotments and the resources. One of the things that you need to understand as part of dispelling those misconceptions is that the grazing rights in those grazing allotments are acquired by prior appropriation and beneficial use. And so those become private property interests that are owned by the rancher in the split forage and water estates on the grazing allotments. The federal government still owns the land, holds title to the land, the surface, if you will, still holds title to the minerals. Someone else may claim a right or a claim to the minerals, but that's another split estate on the federal domain. Same with timber. Then we've got all the split estates in the bundle of sticks that applies to the recreation estate, the access estate, all of those things. But with respect to ranching and ranchers and the grazing allotment, we're dealing primarily with the forage estate and the water estate, which ranchers can acquire a private property interest in. And so if you understand that, then you will understand that the fees that they pay are not being paid for the grass or for the forage or for the water or for utilization of all of those things, because they already own a right to the grass. They own a right to the forage. They own a right to the water. So what they're paying for is an administrative fee for the assistance of the federal government in managing those grazing allotments. And so what you need to understand is that those administrative fees, and they typically are somewhere between $1 and $2 a month per AUM per month. And the way that works is one cow and calf are typically considered to be an AUM, and then per month, and then sheep have a different formula basically for calculating AUMs that translates to the administrative fee that is paid too. But what you need to understand is that of that administrative fee, only 50% of that is intended to go to the BLM or the Forest Service, the federal government. It's not intended to go back into the general fund, the general coffers of the federal government. It's intended to go back to reimbursement of the administrative fees associated with managing or assisting in managing those grazing allotments. And so the other 50%, half of that, is intended to be set aside in a separate fund for permanent range improvements. That's everything from water improvements to fencing to reseeding. There's a number of different categories that fit into the concept of permanent range improvements, and a full 25% of those administrative fees are earmarked to go back into a fund that pays or reimburses on a collective basis for permanent range improvements. Then you've got the remaining 25%, and the remaining 25% is supposed to go back to local governments and local jurisdictions for the work they do to maintain the infrastructure that helps both the ranchers and the federal government utilize those grazing allotments. So in a lot of cases, we're talking about road maintenance. We're talking about reimbursement to local counties for their maintenance of the roads that the ranchers and the BLM and the Forest Service utilize in those grazing allotments. So that's how so-called grazing fees, that's what they are. That's how they're supposed to be utilized. There's nothing in them that is intended to be used as compensation for the grass or for the forage. It's not a rent. It's not compensation for something that the rancher already owns, which is the right to use the grass, right to use the forage, right to use the water in his grazing allotment that he has acquired through prior appropriation and beneficial use, or that his predecessors in interest have acquired on that basis. So it's intended to be used as an administrative fee. So hopefully that helps dispel some popular misconceptions about so-called grazing fees.